Okay, this is not a dating show. This is not a dating episode. What's going on, Spotify and YouTube? Welcome back to a brand new episode of For the Love of Humankind. And as always, I am your host, Jeff, and I'm excited to finally have another guest with me on the show, and I'll let her introduce herself. So go ahead. Who are you?
I am Cassie.
Okay.
I'm a Canadian, which is probably my big identity. I'm 24. I'm bi, so that kind
Okay,
of...
this is not a dating show. This is not a dating episode. And ironically enough, I'm going to cut you off, even though you yell at me every time I cut you off, and this is a prime example of that. Ironically enough, I was going to have you on another episode. I don't know if you remember me asking you this, to be on an episode with two other exes, which we still might do. Do you remember that?
I was very excited.
Oh, yeah. Well, it might still happen. So y'all may see Cassie or hear Cassie again. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I'm super excited about this episode this week because today has been such a weird day, and I started doing more research on the topic today that we're gonna focus on, and like I looked at the rest of the back of the day and I was like, holy shit, like this is everything that I'm just reading about. And if you're confused, I was confused too. And so there are a few things that I want to cover today, and I brought Cassie on here because she kind of is a resident expert, and I say expert very loosely in this situation, this scenario, this topic. But she knows a few things about what we're going to kind of focus on. So we're actually going to talk about something that has been founded way before any of us were alive. Something that was founded in 3000 BCE, right? So 3000 before Christ. I don't know what the E stands for. I'm just going to say before Christ, assuming that you're a religious individual. So the idea of numerology. So if you all know anything or follow anything on social media, you probably see some sort of numerology, astrology, sun, moon, rising, zodiac signs, something like that. It's become very popularized through apps like CoStar or Sanctuary. You can even scroll through TikTok and see people talking about that stuff. And so I found an interest in this because I think it's so, I don't know what the word is. I don't know if it's like fate or coincidence. And we're gonna talk about that because I'm curious to hear Cassie's thoughts. But the idea that numbers are literally everywhere and there's a meaning behind numbers. Like if we look at a clock and we continue to see like 1111, that's the universe giving us a sign. Or we see the number 666 and we're like, oh shit, Satan's rising again. Or like 888 and you're like, okay, here comes Jesus, right? Like we see this, we see numbers everywhere. And I'm curious when we get here in a little bit to hear your perspective and experience with numerology, Cassie. But I wanted to talk about like where this even started, right? Like why are we talking about this? Like what's the history behind really like astrology, numerology, all of that fun stuff. And so let's talk about numerology, and then we'll go into astrology a little bit later. But what do you know? What do you know about numerology?
I think numerology is something that I've gone into more recently. I don't
Okay.
think it's in mainstream media as like astrology or horoscopes. But But I was really drawn to it, and I think what you were saying about, like, like, seeing numbers and patterns, you said 1111, and I chuckled because I literally have that tattooed on me. Um, I think it's, like, you could tell there's a real, like, vibe or, like, energy, and I feel like you can actually
Hmm.
feel and be drawn to that, especially with numbers.
Okay.
Um, it's kind of like the different ways that, seeing this repetition of numbers can maybe influence your life and how it can affect you and maybe how you present yourself to others, maybe your
Hmm.
feelings. Um, you're probably more well versed on like the history of everything. Um,
That's only because
but
I've been reading for the last 2 hours, so I'm
I've
not.
been grinding, yeah.
But no, I think you're right. Like the idea of numerology, right, is like the relationship that a number has with like this mystical energy, nature, like right on like our level, but also like a worldly level. And I don't know if you can hear Ollie barking in the background, but he's just going wild. Um, but right, it's like this idea that we have these numbers in our lives, and there's a meaning behind it.
Mhm.
Um, and it's something that didn't even really start being recorded, the idea of numerology, until like the early 1900s, right? At least in English. That's when it started like becoming, I don't want to say popularized in the Western culture, but um, you see like numerology pop up in, like I said, ancient Egypt, Babylon. You've
Right.
got China, Rome, Japan and Greece, like all of the older um, cultures that have been around for millennium, right? Um,
Mhm.
but then you think about like, okay, like how did it start, right? Like who was the first person that started this? And for those of you that have ever taken math in your life, you probably know what a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? That's the Pythagorean theorem, which was founded by Pythagoras, who also really just became like the father of numerology. Um, this man just knew everything. Um, he just had like a fascination with numbers, right? And he studied, you know, numerology for like 22 years in Egypt. And I promise you, I'm not reading this off of a website. This is all straight off the top of my head.
Right.
Um, but it's like the idea of assigning letters to numbers and vice versa. Again, the a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Part of his stuff, but going back to seeing numbers like 666, there's a meaning behind that. Like you see that people typically know what that means, right? Like even if you're
Mhm.
not religious, I feel like people typically know if you see 666, like some sense around it, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then you think of like Hanukkah, right? Hanukkah is 8 nights. Like why? Why was that a thing? Um, Earlier this season, we had a conversation about tarot cards. Every tarot card has numbers, right? That have their own unique meanings. Um, and in Chinese tradition, you see like the number 4 is associated with bad luck. So we see these things everywhere and have seen them throughout history. So when did you like start thinking about or like looking into numerology?
Um, numerology was more recent for sure.
Okay.
And it really was just because it was like you pass like the stove or like you're flicking through TV channels or like you're looking at a timer and you happen to glance up or you wake up and it's 1:11 in the morning. I
Hmm.
was the number 1. Um and I had no idea why. I really like the sentiment behind, 1111 make a wish.
Okay.
So like that's cute, that's cool. Um, and then I was scrolling on social media and I saw something about, there being more of a meaning behind repetition of numbers.
Yeah.
Um, and I looked into it, and after finding out that my soul urge number was number 1, it kind of really like pulled me in and
Okay.
intrigued me and like resonated with me a little bit. Um, so I feel like that initial kind of like being validated almost um, pulled me in and made me kind of want to expand my knowledge on the topic.
Okay. So I know that you talked about Soul's Urge, and so for those of you that don't know what that is, and again, this is from me doing my research recently because I had no idea about any of this. Like I dabble in it a little bit, but not to the extent that I've been researching on. Um, so Soul's Urge is a number that is created. Through adding up the vowels in your name, right? So, uh, thanks to Pythagoras, there is one like a coding 1 through 9. Each letter falls into one of those numbers, and the vowels you add up together to get your soul's urge, which is like what we want most in life,
Mhm.
and what we need to be happy, right? Like this idea that our names hold some sort of meaning and a weight to it that is destined essentially for us moving forward in life. So you mentioned that yours was number 1, right? So essentially, like your soul desires to be successful. Your happiness comes from personal victory and having won a competition. You are driven to rise above the rest. Your heart is determined, bold, individualistic. You feel the best when you have the courage to be yourself and feel completely accepted by loved ones. Does that sound pretty accurate for yourself?
I'd say so, yeah, and I think
Okay.
you can kind of weigh in.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too because there are different numerology categories, right? So there's the name numerology, which is what we're kind of talking about, but there's also like the birth numerology, which takes into effect like your actual birth date. So there are different numbers that fall in line with that, like your month, your day, your year. All of these add up to certain different things that provide you with what your um, what either like what your personality is or like your path of fate, things
Mhm.
like that, right? Um, and so it was interesting because I was telling you before we started recording that today was just like a super weird day for me.
Mhm.
And I was talking to some other friends that like it's like today it just felt weird. Like it was just one of those things. And so I went to the bookstore on campus earlier and bought a brand new book because I was like, okay, like there's some weird shit happening today. Like let me stop by and see what kind of books that they have. So I go in and I'm on my way out. Like I was looking through, I really didn't see anything, and then I like saw a book out of the corner of my eye. Um, Very bright yellow book, and so the title of the book is called "Move On, Motherfucker." So that's the title of the book, and so I was like, okay, like this is perfect. Like I can talk about like it's going to talk about resiliency. It's going to talk about like how do I get over shit. And then I came home um, after work and I started doing some more research to prepare for the recording. And I came across like the birth numerology, right? Which
Mhm.
is a big part of numerology in general. If anybody is into numerology, this is something that they'll know, right? So one of the things in birth numerology, and I'm not going to go through all the different categories and numbers, but one of the big ones and most important ones is called the life path number, right? And
Mhm.
so they claim that this is the most important number of like your numerology portrait, right? Is what they call it, because you're going to have a bunch of different things, um, and it's similar to your sun sign and astrology, that we'll talk about here in a bit, but it's really like your identity and your role in life. It's like who you are and who you're meant to become, right? So it's this idea of like fate. Like this is your journey, this is who you're meant to be, and this is all based on your birth date, right? Your month, you had your month, your birth date, and then your year. So if you're I was born in 1993, so I'm going to add the 1 plus 9 plus 9 plus 3, and then that's going to give me a number, right? So usually you're going to get a double digit number, and then you add those two digits together. So if, for example, it came out to be like 4 plus 5, like your number total came to 45, you're going to add the 4 plus 5 and you're going to get 9. Right? So that's a little explanation of how to figure that out. And so mine ironically was 9. And this is what it says about my path. And I was like, oh, holy shit, like maybe I am a believer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, because the thing too with this, for those of you at home that might be listening, is zodiac signs, numerology, none of it is like scientifically proven to be accurate and describe personality, but it's like this concept that there is a force out there that is well intact and creating everything for a meaningful purpose, right?
Right.
So my 9 path for life. So the 9 path is the humanitarian. And so I was like, okay, like makes sense so far. So I'm going to read through this, and then I'm curious to hear your thoughts and if this actually like aligns with me. So what makes the 9 life path special is that they contain the qualities of all the other numbers. Because they have the strongest vibration, they are often in a position of power, even if they don't ask for it. A person with a 9 life path is friendly, compassionate, and idealistic. They are also deeply creative individuals. There is a deep healing quality to the 9 that people notice. True humanitarians, the 9 life path has a highly developed social conscience who see the injustices of the world and wish to correct them. 9s are also deeply spiritual beings who need a lot of introspection to figure out just what their place in the world is. A 9 life path struggles the most with healing from old wounds. A 9 can either be too responsible for their family or feel abandoned by them. Learn to let go of the past. And when I tell you, when I was reading this earlier, and I was like, holy shit, like this is so accurate. I literally called my mom and I was like, hey, I gotta tell you about this. Like, I'm about to record this episode. I gotta tell you, I literally just like bought this book earlier that's talking about moving on and you know, getting over shit that's haunting you from the past. And here I go and read this, like learn to let go of the past. I was like, holy shit, like is the universe trying to tell me something? Like,
Right.
so
Yeah.
do you think, like, knowing what you know about me, which is a lot, do you feel like this is me?
Honestly, a lot of like the main points that little blurb hit are words or attributes that I would use to describe you. So like, I mean, yeah.
It's and that blows my mind. Like
It's weird when you say it and it actually makes sense and
mhm.
do it.
So on that, like, do you think that there's obviously, like I said, it's not scientifically proven, but like, do you think there's like credibility to this, or do you think that this is more of a coincidence? Like, oh yeah, he's reading that, like I could see that type of deal.
Credibility to something that isn't like backed by science-based fact is maybe difficult.
Okay.
Um, but I would argue that people who subscribe to religion kind of are doing the same shit. Um, I mean, am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong. Uh, I believe in coincidences. However, you know, how many times do they happen? Because if you look at it bigger picture and if you're looking at like, I mean, just one number, maybe yeah, it was a hit with the one number. But if you go in and you actually like, you know, dive into more numbers or how it pertains to where you are today, because it's a big picture thing, it's
Mm-hmm.
not designed to be like where you are statically in the moment. Um, there's a lot of argument that maybe it's not a coincidence. 100% truthfully, I don't know where I stand on
Okay.
that. I definitely am a believer in like, you know, stone cold facts.
Okay.
But I also think that there's things that humans just don't understand yet, and maybe never will. And maybe this is one of those things. So, like, who am I to say it's not true because, we haven't figured out a way to explain it yet?
And I think that's interesting that you say that because right, like I
Mhm.
think there are a lot of things we don't understand, and I think the idea of numerology and astrology is putting something to something else that we don't understand to make it more like digestible, right?
Yeah.
Like my man's Pythagoras, you know, R.I.P. This dude was born in, according to Wikipedia, great reliable resource. My man's was born in 570 BC. 570 BC, right? He died in 495 BC. One, the fact that he died at 75, like that long ago, like what kind of medicine did they have? Like this dude was like surpassing everybody in life, even to today's standards to some people. But the fact that this is part of what he had spent his life doing and discovering, the fact that we're now using that all of these years later and there's like accuracy to it,
Mhm.
like shit is kind of wild to think about.
Yeah. Maybe he was onto something. He did live a really long time.
Listen, if I believe in a higher power, and maybe that higher power is Pythagoras. I don't know. Maybe he's my man that I've been trying to make things a little bit easier sometimes.
Mhm. Who knows?
But like, no, it's just so interesting to me because you like. I used to be a skeptic of numerology, and obviously, like, you're always going to have those doubts for a lot of different things, right? But I just there's just so much to it that just makes sense.
It hits.
And I look at like go back to like the name numerology and think about like, okay, well, like here's this is the name that I prefer and go by, and I look at these numbers like personality number, which is like the consonants, the consonants added up, right? And so mine would add to 13, be 4. And so my personality is like you come across as someone who is reliable, a pillar of strength in any situation. People see you as steady, organized, incredibly knowledgeable, though some think you are a little too serious. People come to you because they believe you have all the answers. And I'm not claiming that like I'm the most organized or most knowledgeable person, but like I've had people tell me like, thanks for being, a lighthouse in the storm. Like you're just somebody that is as steady mobbing. I don't know why I said that. But really just like holding down the fort, and like that's based off of a name. Like how do you predict something like that?
That's where it trips me out because it does get into kind of like philosophical, like, is everything destiny? And like, I don't subscribe to that. I mean,
Okay.
maybe I'll find this idea of like fate and like, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure I'm behind all of that yet.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. Things can change. Um, but I honestly, I think that there's a lot of like, factors that go into. Now I'm arguing for the other side, but no,
Okay.
there's factors that go into like who you are as a person.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The name thing is hard because that is just kind of saying you believe that maybe everything is just laid out from day one.
That you're like meant to have that name.
Yeah, I don't.
Like the thought was just thrown in somebody's head. Like I think you told me this, and I could be wrong. But you originally were meant to have, like, you were going to be named something else, right?
I My name was something else, and they changed it, I think, 2 weeks after I was born.
So, like, so
Yeah.
if you were to look at like your soul's urge or your personality number,
Mhm.
do you know the name that you had, like you were given at birth?
Samantha.
Okay. Uh, Now, if you were to look at the number for that name compared to your name now as Cassie, do you think that you would find Cassie to be more suitable for who you are based on those numbers?
I
Have you
don't
looked at
know.
that? Okay.
I compared it to that name just because
Yeah.
that's not really a thing I've thought about.
Okay.
Uh, Pretty interesting argument that I will definitely be looking up after this, and I will get back to
You've
you
got some
either way.
homework. You've
Uh, yeah, I don't know, but I mean, also, like, there could have been outside, like my mom. Like, what if she just was not feeling the nickname Sam because I look like a little boy, you know? Like, eh,
or maybe something was telling her that,
or
right?
maybe something was telling her.
And like there are so many things in this world that we don't know. Like, or
Yeah,
there's like
I know.
this is a side tangent, but there's like a statistic that we don't know. Like, it's like 60% of what's in the ocean. Like, one, how do you fucking know like how much we don't know? Two, why don't we know that? Like, I feel like
Yeah,
technology is at a place that we should know those things, but I think that there's just like there's just so much that we don't know. And I think that that potential force, that astrological force that's somewhere there, could have something to say. And again, this is coming from somebody that like has been kind of a skeptic that would like read things just for fun to see how they were. And then you read shit like that, like, and you're just, oh, okay, like maybe there is something behind this, right? Like, I don't know. But like I said, like one of the things that with the numerology is that when it comes to like your fate, right? What was it? Your life path, right? It's very similar to your sun sign, right? Um, and for those of you that don't know, and I learned this from you, what was this, yesterday or the day
yeah,
before? People call it the big three. Had no idea.
yeah,
I thought she was talking about like Ford, GM, and Chrysler, being from Michigan. Like, I, I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. So do you want to explain the big three?
yeah. So, similarly to like numerology, there's certain numbers that hold maybe more insight than others. So that would be like your big three signs: your sun sign, um, your moon sign, and your rising sign. A lot of people argue that with the rising sign, it's actually the most indicative of who you are at your
Hmm.
core, just because obviously, um, sun signs change every 30 days. Risings is like every, I think, 2.5 hours or something like that. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So like the sun sign, if you're not familiar, essentially is like this idea. It's the core of your like solar system, right? The idea that whatever month you were born in, so it's very much so similar to your zodiac sign, or it is your zodiac sign. But depending on like the time of year and that frame where your zodiac sign falls in, that's usually your sun, right? So I was born in July. Mine's Cancer. I'm a very emotional individual, which is pretty accurate. Uh, Cassie, you're uh, a
Wow.
Pisces.
I'm a Pisces.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
could tell. Anyway, but and then you have your moon, right? So your moon is the again based off of your date and your year, right? If I'm remembering correctly. And this is your emotional side, like your private and emotional side. Um, so these two typically can go hand in hand, Again, they change based on year and date. And then you have your rising, which you said is kind of the most indicative of who you are, right? So, or said to be the most indicative. And it changes every 2 hours. So this is like, if I was born at like 10:58 a.m., if I was born like 2 hours later, I probably would have had a different rising sign, right? And so this idea that because of where we were born, when we were born, the time we were born, all of these indicate or assist in indicating who we are as a person and how we react and function. And do you feel like your sun, moon, and rising are accurate?
Yes, but only to the house that they kind of like fall under. So
Okay.
I kind of laughed a little bit because I never really felt like a Pisces. I never really wanted to be like a Pisces, you know.
Okay.
Um
I always
and
wanted to be a Sagittarius.
but like after research, because I never really felt like super emotional or like
Yeah.
day like they didn't really like align with who I thought I was.
Hmm.
So I looked, my rising sign is a Leo.
Mm-hmm.
And that explains the big hair, the
Is that
mane.
true?
I swear to God, yeah. And
Okay.
they're more like outspoken. They like validation. They like
Hmm.
attention. Um,
Hmm.
so maybe that's a little bit more fitting. And then, you know, looking at like my moon sign, we have the same moon sign as we discovered last night. I think that I don't know, everything kind of like checks out.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that it sounds like there is some credibility from something that was discovered millennium ago.
Yes, for me specifically, I
Okay.
would agree.
Um, and it's funny because my rising is in Virgo, um, which for those that have no idea what I'm talking about, I highly encourage you to, if you are at all somewhat interested, uh, downloading either CoStar or Sanctuary, or if you don't want an app on your phone, you can look this up online as well. Um, I'll tag some resources in the description of the video and of the podcast on Spotify, so you can check that out. But it's interesting because the rising in Virgo, and I'm reading this off of the app. First of all, it talks about like your ego and self image is your first house placement. There are like what, 9 houses, 11 houses. There might be more. I don't know. Um, but Virgo rising has sharp skills of discernment and communication. They thrive in situations that involve data or require meticulousness. Structure and systems are also critical for Virgo rising. The Virgo rising's need for organization and efficiency lends itself to pragmatism, perfectionism, and service to others. For this rising sign, routine and self-care are the key to a happy life. And this is where, like, to me, with the rising and comparing it to like my numerology, I fall off a little bit. Like absolutely, self-care is a big part of what's going to make anybody happy. So that's very generic, but you know, for numerology, one of the things that it says is like I don't like routine, and this one says I like routine. I hate routine. Like if I didn't have to do the same thing every single day, fine. Um, but I just feel like stagnant when I do that. And so that's where I find some discernment between the two. But I think overall, like you said, like I think there's some weight to having being told by the stars or the force of the universe that
Hmm.
there's something, right? Like there's something, right?
Yeah.
Like whether you believe in you know, uh, Jesus creating the earth and all the planets and Adam and Eve, sleeping with each other and now all of us are related, or you believe in Big Bang and the evolution, right? Like there's something, right? Like there is some sort of force that created that, and that force is still there, and it's still like present, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's funny because I think about numerology as a whole, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, but the movie 23 with Jim
I
Carrey.
think I have no.
Literally, like, okay, so the idea is that wherever he goes, he sees the number 23, and if you multiply 2 times 3, you get 6, and so 666 is obviously again the devil. Um, but it's this idea again with numerology, and we've seen it time and time again in media. Social media is now taking a huge part of it. Like, I scroll through TikTok and I'll see somebody reading a tarot card, and I'm like, holy shit, like that is exactly what happened to me today. And again, like, I don't know if it's an external force, if it's coincidence, fate, like I'm supposed to see this shit, or I don't know, or if it's just
Mhm.
the algorithm. You know,
Tik-
but go ahead.
TikTok is onto something with their algorithm.
Listen, they sometimes they be slapping, sometimes it's off, but most of the time it's slapping. um so for individuals that have never looked at numerology, or their sun, moon, rising, like how would you explain that to them? Like, how would you encourage them to check it out? Like, what do you think?
I don't think that there's any harm in looking into this stuff. I think at the very least, even if you don't really believe it, I mean, like I said, like I've invested a decent amount of time and I'm still not 100% sure if I
Yeah.
like believe it. But at the very least, it's given me like in, it's been a tool that I can kind of like look at and compare and examine my own life.
Yeah.
Really reflect on like who I am now, who I want to be, and how to kind of like bridge that gap. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong with it really, and I think like if you're going into it with an open mind, like you don't have to base, every single aspect of your life on your horoscope. But I
Right.
mean, looking into it, I mean, really, what's the harm in that? You're just kind of like maybe like it can be a little self-care moment,
Yeah.
you know?
Do you think there are things that people can learn from it if it's something that they decide to start investing time in, investing energy into?
Yeah, I think it's challenged a lot of my beliefs, you know? And a lot of time, and this is kind of where I would argue that a lot of time when people are reading about their signs or their numbers,
Hmm.
they highlight the positives. But
Yeah.
but there's a lot of negatives there
Hmm.
too. And I think when something like that you relate to, or if you can relate to it, and it's like saying, it's kind of a negative thing, can maybe cause you to think a little bit about maybe why that's why you act like that, or why you behave a certain way or think the way that you do. Um, For me, it's been a tool that I've
Yeah.
used. I've enjoyed it. I think I've learned more about myself and in being able to compare the two. I don't. If I had to favor one, it would probably be numerology, just because I find it to be less generalized and more accurate.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah,
Yeah. Our man Pythagoras.
he was. I'm telling you, he did something.
Oh man, what a guy! What a guy! So good. But no, I think it's interesting, and I want to start wrapping up, but I think about the phrase, right, like everything happens for a reason, and I can't help but to think that that is based off of things like this, right? Like the idea that there is some sort of external force, meaning behind the things that we don't necessarily see, or know, and we can't necessarily put something to that, right? So we use something else to help, again, make that a little bit more digestible. And and I think the same thing like happens with religion. And I think you brought this up earlier, right? Like the idea that and you hear all these stories, and again, like I have my own thoughts and feelings on religion, but like the idea that Jesus turned water into wine, or like Jesus dipped people in the lake and completely healed them, right? And like people like if that were to happen today, like how would you explain that? Like you can't, right? There's no plausible explanation for something like that to happen. And as you work in the medical field, right?
Hmm.
There are medical like what's the word I want to use?
Mysteries, miracles, anomalies.
Miracles, thank you, is the word I was looking for. That like you just can't explain. Like we hear stories of, oh, this person had cancer today and they had this tumor, and then days, weeks down the line, oh, it just doesn't exist anymore. Like it's not there. Right?
Hmm.
Like we just there's no explanation. And I think that's very interesting, and I think that kind of ties into this fact. Like there's a lot of stuff that we don't know or have ideas about. But how do we make that digestible for the feeble-minded, if you will? Not to do a
Oh, all right.
throwback. But no, like the average person, right? Like they need something to help them understand.
Everyone
Um,
wants to believe in.
yeah, right.
So, yeah.
And I think that this is, if you don't believe in religion, if you are looking for something to have, faith in, or have some interest in, and not trying to understand like why, and well, essentially why,
Hmm.
for anything, this might be the route for you or for people. Who
Yeah.
knows? But I do want to thank you for spending this time with me, and talking about this. I think it's super interesting to kind of hear your story and your take, on a topic that I feel like has become a lot more mainstream, but like I feel like people still aren't really talking about it, at least from what I've heard, in my circles and experience. So I appreciate it. For those of you that stayed through the whole episode, thank you so much. We will see you with a brand new episode here in a couple weeks. I will have another guest star with me in the next couple weeks. And so thanks for listening. Stay safe and treat people with care. And as always, love yourself and love others.